Hey everyone! So today I'm discussing Big Brother Canada 1 because it's been 10 years since the season and overall series came out, and I've barely talked about the Canadian version on my channel, so I want to start doing that. And of course I have to start with the first season. Compared to BBUS, I rarely rewatch Canada because I feel like the production of many of the seasons are just way too overproduced for me to want to rewatch. But Big Brother Canada 1 is one of the few seasons I don't feel like is overproduced, so out of the seasons, it is easier for me to rewatch. And even with that in mind, it's been like 6 years since I've rewatched the season in full, so a lot of my memory of it outside of the general is kind of gone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the events that have been in each week, so like HOH, nominations, veto, who's evicted, and some general drama, and talk about my feelings about that. And as each week ends, I'll talk about my overall opinions on the boot, and then we'll do that until we get to the very end. And I have some additional notes of stuff that I noticed within the week. So, of course, we start with week 1, and I have a few notes on the stuff I made with the intros, and based off the intros, we can always tell how they want to portray certain house guests. So, what's immediate is Tom's homophobia, which was just very cringe, and it's a consistent theme throughout the first week or two. Production kept on connecting Gary and Emmett together, especially because Gary is a gay male, and Emmett's intro involves him talking to his gay brother. So I found that interesting. So I'm wondering if they wanted them to team up very early on, and it's just a coincidence that it kind of ended up happening. So Anil and Gary came off as haters of one another once they got into the house, and it seemed like they both kind of wanted to be the token gay person of the cast. And I remember Gary making fun of Anil being from Richmond Hill, which is right above Toronto, for the people who don't know. In the intros and stuff, they kept on showing Emmett and Alex's bodies, so they're clearly cast to be eye candy as well. So there's all the immediate stuff I noticed from the intros, and Peter and his diary rooms are very annoying, and it's even worse when they decide to go to him for narration. So I remember from the intro packages of Kat and Danielle that they're set up to be big, explosive personalities, and I found that to be very ironic based on what happened in the season. So, of course, Suzette ends up winning HOH because she was the first person to pick up the phone, and she was told that she had to immediately make nominations. So she made the big move of nominating the two strong guys in Tom and Emmett. This happens within the first few hours of the season, and then the veto happens soon after, where Tom wins the veto. I forgot that this all happened within the first day of the season. Liza makes some additional comments about Tom during the veto competition that was clearly a setup for their showmance. So Kat then does the infamous example of approaching the girls for a girls' alliance, and it's immediately backfiring on her. I forgot that Anil stole glitter to pour out everywhere to make Gary seem like a bigger target and to push him as a replacement. So Suzette ends up nominating Kat, which was very stupid, though Kat's approach to Suzette was very wrong, and Suzette ended up calling Kat a bully, which is ridiculous. Of course, Suzette would end up regretting this choice, which she told Kat in her goodbye message. So Tom's homophobia continues in the second episode, especially when he's paired up with Gary for a task. I forgot that Topaz and Alec were hanging out in the first week, and they were the only showmates at the time. And this would make sense because Emmett and Jillian would make comments later on stating that they're only a thing in the second week onward. So the edit for week 1 in Big Brother Canada is infamously awful, and while they don't show it, it's very clear that the subsection of the house knew about a guy's alliance that was formed, and they didn't go into detail about the boys' alliance yet, but it was clear from the shots that were done that it existed already by this time. And the comments made by Alec, Peter, and Emmett in the later weeks would confirm that it was a thing in week 1. I did forget that Liza did try to get Emmett out with Anil, which would also play a part into Emmett hitting the both of them, and I believe Liza was the only person to vote to evict Emmett. It's interesting because I know their hate boner for one another lasted years, even outside of the house. So now it's time to talk about the first boot in Kat, who was the very first boot and was voted out in an 11 to 1 vote. And honestly, there's not much to say about Kat. She mainly suffered just due to the poor formatting of the first week, where it's only done in 2 episodes, compared to US, which usually has 4 to 5 episodes for the first week, where we get a lot of content. And with the first episode mainly being a generic introduction, they squeeze all the events in the first week into the second episode, and they really only have 20 to 25 minutes to show the events of the first week. We literally only see Kat trying to approach the Girls' Alliance, her awkward conversation with Suzette, and it kind of just moved on to the dynamics of the house afterwards. She seemed like she could have been interesting had she lasted longer, but honestly, she's kind of just a blank slate, in my opinion, just due to all the aforementioned. Now it is time to talk about week 2. And of course, here's where in a Big Brother Canada season where we almost always get the juicy content of the alliances, dynamics, and a good feel of the personalities of the house guests that we just won't get from a traditional BBCAN week 1. So, of course, Tom is pressed about Gary still, especially during the HOH comp, that Jillian does ends up winning. Danielle knows that Jillian hates her and immediately states that she would go home if Jillian won. Clearly, this was recorded after she had already won, so Danielle was already thinking that she was going home at this period. Apparently, there's some jealousy between her and Jillian about Emmett, which everyone in the house knew about, but of course they couldn't show this in week 1, and this never really leads to any drama or anything, so it's kind of just womp. Danielle and Gary start trashing everyone in the house, and Gary doesn't even bother to go into the HOH room reveal. Poor gameplay. Tom does pitch for Suzette and Anil to go up, while Jillian promised Suzette safety, and she states that she hates Anil, though she acts like she's his best friend when she speaks to him. She wants to target Danielle. Anil thinks he's so close to Jillian, so misread there, and he tells her that there's a 4-guy alliance and they latch onto a girl to have a majority numbers, so he pitches for Tom to go. It is impressive that he got that good read about the 4-guys alliance and them latching onto a girl. I'm wondering if he and Liza had a conversation about that, which just wasn't shown, but either way, a good read on his part. Emmett convinces Jillian to nominate Anil over Danielle, and of course, Peter and the guys push this as well since they don't like Anil and don't trust him. Tom outright tells Tala that he has a final 2 with Emmett, though he apparently told other people this. Stupid gameplay. So Jillian is struggling with this choice since apparently she promised Anil she wouldn't nominate him, and she changes her nominations literally last minute, so she's already putting the keys in the slot and then she changes again. Her being scatterbrained is a consistency throughout the season, and then we move on to the next episode, where Anil and Gary are nominated. And they're both shading each other because they don't like each other and want the other to go home. Anil is crying in the HOH room and he claims that it was fake, though I don't think it was that fake. So he cried to the entire house, but most of them don't care because he trash talks a lot of people and is very messy and is clearly overplaying. Emmett's hatred for Anil, even up until a year ago when he was discussing BBCAN1 with Cody and Derek on their podcast, is weird as hell. Jillian and Emmett's romance segment starts, so they start hooking up around here, and it is noted that Emmett has latched onto her from the moment she got HOH. So, Liza hating Emmett was always funny to me, especially knowing the context that she's explained in her YouTube videos. So right after that, we get a Tom and Liza showman segment where Tom admits that he's more open with Liza than Emmett. So there's a Marsha the Moose segment, way too much Peter screen time, which is a problem throughout the season. He mentions that Liza was in a showman with Tom and Andrew, which he kind of confirmed. I don't remember her and Andrew being a thing, so I'm wondering if this was a feats thing, or it was something that was just put out there to make her look worse narratively wise. He's doing the Will and Dan shtick of throwing competitions, which, okay. So Gary ends up winning the veto, and even in his intro, he was doing athletic stuff. So I don't know why people were so shocked or it's made such a big deal that he, clearly a guy who is very strong and physical, would win a physical competition. Alec pretends that it's his birthday, and I believe Dr. Will did this as well in BB2. And Peter's the only one that knew it wasn't his birthday. We get a bunch of shared content, and they think they're the smartest ones in the house, and Alec states, bros before HOS, essentially. You will notice throughout the season and through the next 2 or so seasons that they cast a lot of nerdy superfans who are really, really, really excited that Big Brother is on Canada now, meaning that they can compete and play Big Brother now, as these same nerdy fans have been watching for over the last decade, watching the US, and because they get the opportunity to play, they start trying to emulate the BBUS legends, and it kind of affects the show in a negative way because production gasses them up to do so, and they get a lot of screen time doing this when they should have just been playing as themselves and creating their own strategies. So Jillian asks people if they want to be a pawn, and Danielle offers, which makes Jillian happy, since she wanted to target Danielle initially anyways. Liza tries to pitch a girls before guys thing with Jillian. I wonder why Topaz was left out, and it was ironic because Liza the week before stated that a girls' alliance wouldn't work when Kat tried to pitch it. Tom and Tala end up fighting because Gary took most of the alcohol for himself, Danielle, and Tala to have, and Jillian shades the hell out of AJ, since he has no social or physical gain. She states that she would have put him up if she didn't put Danielle up. And yeah, Danielle ends up becoming the replacement nominee because she volunteered to, which was of course a very stupid move. Now on to the eviction episode, and of course Danielle is worried now that she's on the block. Duh! Liza tells Peter that Jillian pitched a girls' alliance, though it was Liza, and Peter tells Alec and Emmett, the guys' alliance that's called the Quattro and is introduced here, about it. All of the guys but Emmett wants Danielle to go, as he still wants Enil to go, which is weird, though he has this obsessive hatred for Enil, which is odd. And the Shield wants to use Enil as a shield, who is still obsessed with targeting Gary, though it doesn't benefit him at all. Liza doing this to Jillian, which is pitching a girls' alliance to her and throwing her under the bus, would end up coming to bite Liza in the butt with Jillian. So Danielle doesn't campaign, as she spends most of her time hanging out with Gary and Suzette, but they realize Enil is getting too comfortable, and Danielle says that everyone told her that she's safe. Those same 3 people start trashing Liza after walking out of the room, claiming that she would vote to keep them, though they know she's working for Tom, and none of them trust her, which is just another example of Liza doing too much and giving bad reads, or bad vibes to people. Gary decides to host a fashion show as a way to kind of campaign for Danielle, but it doesn't end up working since he feels like everything went back to normal and he sensed the vibe. So he asks Emmett and Jillian if Danielle is going home. They tell him no, though he knows that she's clearly going home. And Liza tells Enil, who she's clearly close to since they have a few scenes together, that Danielle is too overconfident. And this was a clear example of Emmett and Gary being close, but they haven't really focused on it that deeply. So Danielle goes home in an 8-3 vote, and while she definitely did have a personality, I don't think she had a huge or explosive personality as production was expecting. Her gameplay was non-existent at most, and horrendous when it did exist. She knew she was on the outs but didn't make strong connections outside of Gary and Suzette. She volunteered to be on the block to someone she had bad vibes with, and she didn't campaign at all. And even outside of this week, she didn't have much, if any, potential as a player. So while I could have seen myself enjoying her had she lasted longer, there's really not a whole lot to go off of, and she ends up being kind of forgettable, and the only thing she's known for is being blindsided. And even that wasn't a huge reaction as the show made it out to be. It is time to talk about week 3, and I didn't give an overall opinion on the first 2 weeks, and honestly they're pretty standard at best, kind of boring at worst. Overall, they're just kind of forgettable and not noteworthy weeks. So we're just going to move on to week 3. Tom ends up winning HOH, and Gary immediately feels that he's going to go on the block, and Suzette ends up snapping when he wins HOH. She goes into the storage room and she calls all the women tramps and a whole bunch of other stuff while cussing Enil out while he was trying to tell her that she's a great representation for the indigenous community, but she snaps at him because she feels like he's a rat last week who sold out herself, Gary, and Danielle to stay. He ends up running off. So what's interesting is that after his poor actions and edit, they try to soften Tom on the show, edit-wise, as he talks about his mom going through cancer. Him and Emmett want to send Gary home at this point. Alec is tired of Tom and doesn't like him, which he makes very clear to Emmett, as they both end up talking and thinks that Tom is very volatile. Alec and Topaz talk, and she tells him that Tom told her that he wants Gary out. Alec tells her that she needs to let Gary go, despite Topaz being close with him, so we learn that Topaz and Gary are very close. Topaz ends up ignoring Alec's advice and campaigns for Gary anyways. Tom tells Emmett after the conversation that Topaz spoke to him about Suzette targeting him and to protect Gary. This was actually good work from Topaz, where he wanted to target Gary, but after the conversation he had with her, he ended up targeting Suzette. If this is as accurate as the edit made it seem, it shows that Topaz can be influential when people listen to her, and she has some great tactics. There's a task that's done, Gary isn't participating, which is annoying the house guests. Topaz and Gary have a game talk and name their alliance called the Secret Wedding. They end up talking about how close Tom and Liza are and how he needs to make a fake deal with Tom to take their Tom shots that Tom can't and to make Tom feel secure with him. So this ends up happening, and Tom tells Gary that he'll pull him up so Gary can play in the veto. So Tom nominates Suzette and Gary. Suzette snickers during the nomination ceremony, which riles Tom up, and it causes him to rant and storms off. Emmett states that Tom derails from plans and is too emotional. Remember, Gary was supposed to be the target, not Suzette. Suzette and Gary have a nice pep talk, and most of Tom's allies state that he's getting too big-headed with power, and they want to turn on him, especially the Shield. They push the Lisa and Peter thing as another showmance, but I don't think it was romantic or as close as Liza and Tom was. It's also clear that Peter is jealous of Tom's relationship with Liza. So Suzette takes herself out of the veto competition by accident, and Tom cheers. Suzette then calls him a redneck, which annoys everyone, and Tom has to calm himself down. Tom ends up having a conversation with AJ and states that he's going to be the pawn, and this was after Tom wins the veto and wants to fulfill his promise with Gary that he would veto Gary off. Peter and Alec talk about Tom some more, and Alec plans to backdoor Tom if he wins HOH, with Neil and Gary being pawns, and I think they talk to Gary around this time about it as well. Jillian then tries to convince Tom to keep Gary on the block and to send him home, but Tom pulls her off. It's interesting that Jillian had this moment where she's fighting for what she wants, which shockingly isn't as often as I thought it would have been while rewatching this season. After AJ is nominated in Gary's place, AJ pretends that he's nervous about going home, and Gary is immediately onto him, knowing that he's full of crap about being nervous about going home. Suzette starts to feel bad for herself and doesn't want to campaign, though she does start to change her mind and starts to campaign a little bit. Liza then talks about her strategy, which is to play all the men against one another and to build close relationships with them. Andrew and Liza start talking about the game, since she feels like her relationship with Andrew suffers. So I guess this was some sort of confirmation about what Peter said about Liza and Andrew in the previous week. Tom gets jealous of this, so he starts to flirt with Topaz to piss her off. He tells Emmett that he wants to send Andrew home next, and Emmett tells Tom that Liza is a snake who is controlling him. So Emmett really doesn't like Liza, and this is another example of Tom being overtly emotional and letting that rule his game. Tom tells Alec and Peter that he wants Andrew out. Alec then starts to bash Liza and Tom to Peter and later Emmett, and Peter tells Liza that her target is growing, So this is an interesting self-interest move from Peter, as this wasn't something that Alec would approve of. The Quattro starts talking about Tom and Liza even more, and this is clearly an example of the house already turning on Tom and Liza, especially with the additional comments that were made about Tom earlier on in the week and of Liza being a snake, which was shown in the prior week as well. Of course, Canada's veto starts to take place where there's a twist implemented where they have to vote for someone on the block to be saved, and clearly because of Suzette's edit, and clearly because Canada didn't like Tom, they vetoed Suzette, and Tom had to be forced to nominate someone else. Tom decides to nominate Anil because Emmett convinces him to, and Anil is sent home on an 8-2 vote. While I don't find Anil to be contrived like Alec and Peter were, especially in the diary room, I do feel like he was one of the many examples of early BBCAN male superfans who are trying to emulate the likes of Dan, Well, and other BB Mastermind legends instead of forming their own strategy. It seemed like he rubbed people the wrong way immediately by trying to overplay, trying to cause chaos, and then trying to make himself seem weak and to gain sympathy. It just seemed like everyone was onto him, though I really hated that this was how he went out because he didn't get much content during this final week, and I do like that he was on to the Quattro Alliance and the boys, so he can be very perceptive. If he just laid lower a bit in the first few weeks, I think he would have lasted longer. And while he was twist screwed, I only see him lasting a week or two longer anyways, without the twist, so I don't think he would have done much better. Overall, I do think this week is better than the first 2 weeks, but it's more so of a build-up as to what was to come in the next week. So week 4 is a really good week, and this is really where the season starts to peak in a positive direction, as I was kind of getting bored during the first 3 weeks, but this week was where I started really remembering why I liked Big Brother Canada 1, where I was watching the first few weeks and I thought, oh, the season's worse than I thought, but I got really invested at this point. So Emmett wins the HOH before it's taken away due to his cheating, and Tom wants Emmett to backdoor Suzette to send an FU message to Canada, so Tom's clearly just salty, and Emmett doesn't give a crap about any of this. We get some additional content about the prior eviction, where after the veto is used, Liza pushed Tom to put up Andrew, but Emmett convinced him to put up and send home Anil. Clearly, putting up Andrew would have been a better move, just based on what happens. I wonder if Emmett and Andrew already had an allegiance and were close to one another at this point, but it wasn't shown due to it not being a part of the main narrative. It wouldn't shock me though. Liza knows that her butt is grass with Emmett winning HOH, and Emmett tells Tom that Tyler told him that Liza's target is Emmett. So Emmett tells Nam not to speak to Liza, and Liza ends up speaking to Tom anyways and tells him that he's playing Emmett's game. Emmett states that the girls are his biggest threats, so I don't like that he was very bro-centric and very anti-woman, and I feel like if it wasn't for the events of this week, he would have ended up playing a very similar bro-centric game like Dane in Big Brother Canada 7. And it was clear that Emmett felt better working with people that he was similar to demographic-wise, pretty much. So Topaz idiotically tells the house that the people in the house that ended up coming were a part of some sort of task, which would turn out to involve the new HOH, so bad move on Topaz's part. So Gary ends up winning the next HOH competition, and he has an obnoxious celebration. He has a bunch of game conversations on the couch with people to see who everyone wants gone, and Tom and Liza feel safe for some odd reason. Emmett and Topaz bond about their hatred over Liza, and we learn that Liza wants to target Topaz. Peter comes in to warn Emmett about Gary targeting the pairs, and he and Topaz see right through Peter as he is aligned to Liza and is trying to protect her. So good read on Emmett and Topaz's part. Gary clearly wants to make a very, very huge move, and he would quote this as to what happens in the finale as a part of his speech, and one of the main reasons why he deserves to win. But it wasn't as big of a move as he thought, since Jillian throws Liza under the bus, Andrew throws Tom, and shockingly Emmett under the bus. Alex suggests to nominate Tom and Liza. Alec tells Gary that Liza is targeting Topaz, and apparently Emmett told Gary to put up Tom and Liza, though this wouldn't be shown until the next episode. So while it was impressive that Gary made this move, it was clear that the house was going in this direction anyways. Of course, Tom is pissed about being nominated, and he's threatening to nominate everyone, though he thinks Liza is the target, which Gary says in his speech, but it isn't true, and he's mad that Gary broke his word since Tom went out of his way to protect Gary in the prior week. Liza tells Tom not to veto her, and Emmett tells him to lay low. Liza is trying to kill Gary with honey, but Gary isn't buying it during their conversation, since he's telling her that the entire house doesn't trust her, which is true. More Quattro drama happens, and Emmett tells Tom that he and the Quattro approve of Tom going up with Liza, since they want him to choose the alliance over Liza. We get more Tom and Liza showmance bonding screen time, whatever. Alec ends up winning the veto. He and Peter have a conversation with Gary where they all agree to get Tom out, claiming that it is to protect Topaz. The edit makes it seem like the Shield were the ones who controlled everything and made it look like they got Tom out, though I don't know how true that is. Maybe it was true, or maybe it was really Emmett, or just the entire house who was about it. We also see some Emmett and Gary having fun with one another during the task, and it's clear once again that they are close from very early on. Tom barges into Alec and Emmett's conversation, and he tells them that he feels disrespected by them, especially with the news that they approved him going up. Alec tells Tom that he isn't using the veto, and they all argue for a few minutes. Tom then reveals the Quattro alliance to Liza. Gary claims that he'll put up Peter if the veto ends up being used. Oh, I forgot to mention this, but Alec ended up winning the veto, but of course he doesn't use it because it doesn't benefit him in any sort of way. So we move on to the eviction episode, and there really isn't a whole lot of time to see what happens because it's a double eviction, and I really wish that Big Brother US does more pre-jury double evictions. It would shock the house and would make things more interesting. So anyways, Tom opens the door with Alec in it and causing the latter to spiral into depression since he has a career outside of this and he doesn't want to be exposed like that, especially without his consent. Tom laughs about it and doesn't seem to care much as he gives a weak apology. Topaz ends up yelling at Tom once it gets all back to her. Tom then cries to Liza, but I do remember Liza stating in her YouTube videos that it had nothing to do with the Alex situation and that they were just talking about his life, where he apparently went through some hard stuff. I also remember Liza stating that Topaz ends up yelling at her, but it wasn't shown on the feeds and they cut it off in the episodes. And she pretty much stated that Topaz called her all types of SLUT and all that type of stuff. Tom ends up going home on an 8-1 vote, and obviously I didn't like him, and I forgot how much I didn't like him until I watched him in the first 2 weeks, especially with his blatant homophobia, but they do go out of their way to make him more complex during his last 2 weeks, showing a more sensitive side, and I do think he was a solid, though not a great pre-jury villain. There have been many more pre-jury villains who are much more entertaining than him and fill the archetype, but he did contribute to the season, and he left at the right time. If he wasn't so emotional, he would have done a lot better in the game. So we get to the double eviction, and Alec blatantly throws the final HOH competition to Andrew in front of everyone, which I believe would be the start of Alec's downfall in the game, since Andrew's also weirded out by this. Of course, Andrew makes the house nominations of Liza and Suzette, the two people on the outs. Emmett ends up winning the veto, doesn't use it, and Liza unanimously goes home. I haven't told anyone this, but Liza was the one who kind of got me into Big Brother as I was watching her YouTube videos talking about Big Brother US, and then she talked a lot about her experience. And I wasn't sure as to whether I wanted to watch Big Brother Canada, since while I knew it was out in 2013, I just wasn't interested in it at the time. Though I ended up watching the season for the first time a year or two later, so that's how I got into it. But as for her role in the season, she wasn't a big personality, and while I liked that she gamed a lot, and she actually did have a lot of good reads, she was just very transparent with her strategy where everyone knew she was playing with the men. Everyone knew she was rounding out information, and it was just very clear that she wasn't as great socially as she thought she was. And she kind of gave off a smarmy vibe to her. I think she is now mostly remembered in the community for her messiness post-season, where she got interviewed with Topaz, Aika, Emmett, a few other people, and I think she made a few microaggressive comments and partook in the drama in Sequester a few seasons ago, so yeah. Either way, this week was a very good week in Big Brother Canada 1. So now we are approaching week 5, which is the halfway point of the season and the very end of the pre-jury. And honestly, this week I think sucks. Whenever I would think back on this season in the last several years, I would always forget about this week and I never understood why, but now that I've rewatched it, I get it, because it's boring as F. So anyways, Alec ends up winning the HOH, and still not over his own HOH, Andrew questions Alec, blatantly throwing the double HOH in front of him, and Andrew doesn't trust Alec's explanation. It's clear that Alec doesn't have Andrew's trust. Alec and Peter feel like putting up Suzette and AJ since they're good with the house, so they think at this point, and Topaz told them that Suzette thinks that they are masterminds. They claim that they'll throw the HOH as long as Suzette is out of the HOH comp. I don't know when it was mentioned, but Gary had an alliance with Topaz, Alec, and Peter, so he speaks to them and says that he can control Suzette and that he wants to target Tala, trying to sway them into targeting Tala, since he cannot read her. But clearly, Alec and Peter don't give a crap about what Gary's saying. Still dealing with the after effects of Tom being evicted, Emmett states that he plans on going to the end with Jillian, since his original final two was just evicted, and he plans to regroup. So it's interesting that he actually would have taken Tom to the end, and I think Tom going at this point helped Emmett focus more on the game, and I think it made him a lot more likable, so it was good for him. And he mentioned that he plans to regroup. To me, I see this as him clearly being over the Quattro and the Shield overall, and this was the start of him turning on them. Tala does have her infamous meltdown during the HH competition, which is just hilarious. So pretty much everyone is tired of Suzette, but Alec doesn't know who to put up beside her. Andrew bashes Alec to Emmett some more, and he calls Alec a PUSS, so on and so forth. Alec ends up telling Suzette that he is going to put her up, and she cries after he leaves to Gary, who is still aligned with the Shield at this point. Alec then tells AJ that he's a pawn, and AJ obviously doesn't volunteer, so Alec nominates AJ and Suzette. Suzette starts whining and complaining about being nominated yet again, and Topaz is over it, since she feels like Suzette mentions her being a mother as a sympathy card. Emmett pretty much makes the same sentiments Topaz makes as well. Gary is conflicted about whether he should save Suzette or not if he wins the veto, but he knows that he cannot afford to make more enemies in the house, and he is still working with Alec, and he wants to keep that relationship. Alec and Peter have a shared diary room where they're replicating Chilton from All Stars way too much. Peter mentions that Alec doesn't like Topaz and that they're running the house with all the votes, which is interesting since it's not as accurate as they thought. And I feel like them bashing on the woman and Alec bashing Topaz just wasn't necessary. And I feel like they're doing this especially because of Chilton, Sherman Singh, and bashing Janelle and Erica. So AJ has a lot of silly content here where he just creeps an obstacle course and it was okay, but we do know that he's close to Andrew. Emmett ends up winning the veto, and he gives a brutally honest speech to Suzette about her guilt tripping and needing to focus on the game. Obviously, Emmett doesn't use the veto. Suzette and Emmett go in another room and they argue more about her tactics and his speech, where he gives her advice about the game and it's brutally honest, but he could have executed it the best way. Alarms keep on taking place because Topaz ignores their warnings, so they took away Alec's headphones. This adds context to the showmance of Alec and Tala going downhill, since she blamed Big Brother instead of taking accountability and apologizing. Alec then suggests to Emmett and Peter that she needs to go soon, which I just found unnecessary. Topaz then rants to Gary about Alec as a player and as a person, but she decides to apologize to him for everything that happened, and he claims that he wasn't blaming her for the headphones, which is a lie, but they quote-unquote make up, though Alec bashes her in the diary room. Suzette ends up going home 6-1, and while I do like Suzette's personality, she was never cut out for the game. She never really played much of the game, and while I don't think she used her history and her background as an intentional strategic move, I could see why it came off that way. She was way too emotional, especially with how she handled her HOH, only to regret putting up Kat, how she handled Anil when he was trying to cheer her up, and her spazzing out at Tom was just too much. She could have been a better listener, and I wish she was just more emotional and listened more. But overall, I enjoyed her presence in the game. But she was an awful game player, one of the worst. So we've officially made it through the halfway point at week 6, and now the jury phase has started. And I personally really like this week. There are a lot of changing dynamics strategically and personally. A lot of people really start to rise and peak, and a lot of people start to have the start of their declines happen. There's a good amount of drama, a lot of strategic intricacies that are happening, and it's one of the best weeks of the season. So Topaz wins HOH, and she's immediately brought to the HOH room and has 5 minutes to choose her nominations, where everyone is watching her, unbeknownst to her. Topaz speaks out her thoughts and said she planned to shake up the house when she won HOH. She mentions that the house overall wants Tala out, but she will plan to nominate AJ and Andrew, but she doesn't want to send AJ home. She says that she doesn't have strong ties to Andrew, and if he wins veto, she'll backdoor a strong threat. Topaz eventually realizes that everyone heard her thoughts, and Arisa tells them that someone will be evicted immediately without veto, and will be the first juror. When she would have had the majority votes, 2 of her supposed allies flip on her and flip to evict AJ instead of Andrew. Honestly, AJ's kind of a dud. He's definitely a dud strategically, though he knew that once he was a pawn, he would have eventually been pawned out of the house, but we never hear much about his actual gameplay, and we never really saw him take active part of improving his standing. And while he could be funny at times, he was really put on screen, so I couldn't even really say that he was very funny. Overall, just meh at best, kind of a bore at worst, though inoffensive. So Topaz tries to backpedal and explain herself, which is hilarious, but it's just not working. Peter trashes Topaz to Emmett and reveals that Emmett was going after Topaz anyways, but her mentioning backdooring a stronger player meant Emmett or Jillian. Topaz and Alec argue about him flipping on her, and they essentially break up. Alec claims that keeping Andrew would cause Alec to be a shield, and so Andrew can take out some of Alec's targets. This is so ironic, especially since he does end up regretting this, and props to him for admitting so later on. Alec does end up making up with Topaz, though in the diary room, he said that he wanted her to look like the bad guy, and Topaz claims behind his back that she has to fake it with Alec for game purposes in the diary room. Gary has his infamous meltdown, and Topaz consoles him, and she starts to cry. Jemet's reaction to this is just hilarious. Anyways, Andrew wins HOH. Andrew tells Gary that he's putting Gary and Topaz up together, and Andrew is claiming that Topaz is the target, but Gary is the actual target. Gary noticed that Andrew claimed that he's also planning to backdoor someone, and denied, stating that Topaz is the target, though Andrew literally told him that a few minutes earlier. Gary claims that Andrew is like Tom, who makes personal and weak moves. So Gary and Topaz are nominated. Topaz and Gary are sulking and are sad that one of them are most likely going home. Alec decides to go in the HRH room and tells them all that he won't stop until both Gary and Topaz are out of the house, and he unnecessarily throws them under the bus, stating that he knows he and Topaz won't be friends outside of the house. It's really just unnecessary and it does nothing positive for his game. Peter makes a pretend final three with Tala, who feels like crap after Topaz mentioning that most of the house wants her out, while Andrew and Emmett form the East Coast Final Three, where they also bash the Shield a bit. Andrew wins the veto, and he speaks to Emmett about pulling in Tala to have the majority, and Emmett speaks to Jillian about pulling in Tala and getting close to her. Gary ends up arguing with Tala over slop and food, where Gary looks horrible in this argument, and Topaz ends up arguing with Tala a bit later over sleeping in the same bed with Alec, though it was all innocent, where Topaz looks horrible. But it was a lot of drama, and it was pretty good drama, to be honest. So Andrew doesn't use the veto, and he and Peter are both trying to pull in Tala into being on their side. Emmett is cutting Gary's hair, and he tells Gary that he's in an alliance with Andrew and Jillian, and that they want Alec and Peter, but mainly Alec, out. Gary tells Topaz, who tells Alec. Alec tells her that she is going to stay and that they're going after Andrew, so they realign, and Gary goes home unanimously. I remember my first time watching Big Brother Canada 1, I thought Gary was super obnoxious, but I actually really liked him this time, and he wasn't as obnoxious as I thought he was. There's a lot of sincerity when it comes to him, and you can tell he's just being himself and is being confident, and there's a lot of somberness and warmth to him overall. As a player, he was very good competitively, but I don't think he was strong strategically, though he wasn't as weak as I thought he would. Maybe targeting Tom wasn't the best idea, but it did shift the house, though not as much as he claimed it did. It seemed like he was just starting to get in with the majority while he was taken out, but his social and strategic flaws in the beginning put him in a position where he was a threat, but he couldn't really integrate as well as he could have, and he couldn't hide behind his allies anymore. I'll talk about him when he comes back later on. Now we're going to move on to week 7, and this, in my opinion, is the best week in Big Brother Canada 1. I think the season kind of peaks here as there's the infamous betrayals, and then there was a good amount of drama that happened here as well, but most of it involved game. And it has some of the best downfalls in Big Brother Canada history, so let's just get right to it. So Alec immediately throws the HOH, since he really feels like he is safe with everyone, despite being the biggest target in this house. Peter is annoyed, since they both agreed that they needed to win this one. Emmett tells Jillian to make a deal with Topaz. She promises Topaz that neither her or Alec, the top two targets of that side, will touch the block, which causes Topaz to drop to give the HOH to Jillian. Emmett then convinces Jillian that it's okay to break the deal, so he suggests to her that she puts up Alec and Peter. I'm forgetting the amount of times that Emmett had to tell her or advise her to do things, where Jillian wasn't thinking about certain things beforehand, that I didn't realize until this most recent rewatch. Jillian and Topaz end up BSing one another in the conversation they have as they throw Peter under the bus, stating that he's a coaster, as well as Tala stating that she's a floater. Jillian talks to Alec, and he can tell that she is BSing him and not saying that he's safe, so he threatens her, and Jillian doesn't take it well at all. Jillian speaks to Peter and tells him that the only two free people for her to nominate are him and Tala. Peter bashes Tala and Topaz, as he throws the latter under the bus, and says that he would hate to lose the game to them. The Shield, Alec, and Peter are finally nominated, and they're pissed off. Alec now wants to target Emmett and Jillian. Emmett wants Alec to go, since they know that Peter and Topaz will scatter without him. Makes sense, and it's a good read. Peter is insistent on sticking with Emmett if Alec goes home, which Jillian is aware of, so that's a good read on her part. Alec decides to throw the veto because he wanted Peter to win, or that's what he claimed, and so he could say that he socially stayed in the house. Everyone is confused with this since it's a dumb move and he's the target. And even if he wasn't, you don't throw the veto while you're on the block. I feel like Alec did this because Dr. Will and Dan did this in their seasons, but the situations there and his situation aren't the same. So Peter ends up winning the veto, and Jillian tells, or is in the process of telling Topaz that she's going to go up, and Topaz cuts her off because she already knows what Jillian is trying to say to her. She says that she'll vote out Alec over Tala if Tala is nominated, and Jillian doesn't believe Topaz at all, which is the correct read. Topaz then overhears the East Coast Alliance talking about her after she leaves the room, and this pisses her off even more. Peter and Alec come up with a pitch to get Jemmett to send Topaz home, and they offer a fake deal. So Peter finally gives Topaz her credit as an underestimated player, that his alliance is taking a hit either way with whoever goes home, and she might become his closest ally, though we clearly see what happens 30 minutes later in the episode. So the Shield brown-nosed Emmett and Jillian about not targeting them, but Topaz will. Alec goes home in a 3-1 vote, and I do give him credit for taking accountability for not believing in Topaz and how he should have kept AJ over Andrew. So Alec is very frustrating because I feel like he bashed Topaz way too much and unnecessarily so, and I feel like all of his moves were inspired by Chilltown and to a lesser extent Dan. I feel like if he just played his own game and didn't come with the strategies to play like Dan or Dr. Well, he would have done much better in the game. And I believe that he allowed Chilltown and Dan to cloud his mind frame and his thought and his strategy to the point where he started to make a lot of boneheaded decisions and he thought he was smarter than everyone else. He doesn't get as many screen time or diary room as Peter, so he didn't annoy me as much. But he made more boneheaded decisions than Peter, though I think, just based off natural skill set, socially, competitively, and strategy, I think he's the better player. I didn't like how he thought he was smarter than everyone else, but he had an entertaining downfall. So it is the second double eviction of the season, and there really isn't much to discuss. Emmett wins his first HOH. He nominates Tala and Topaz. Peter wins the veto, and Topaz begs him to use it, but he's convinced by Emmett to not use the veto. And with this, Topaz quickly goes home unanimously. So I really enjoyed Topaz throughout the season, and she's one of my favorites. Most of her reads strategically were on point, though I do think she made the mistake of campaigning for Gary too much during Tom's HOH. And I feel like she did get a bit emotional too much, but she was usually always defending herself or defending her friends, so that is a good quality to have. And I feel like she bonded more with the underdogs without losing her position in the game. I think she just needed to find allies who respected her, and I hate to say this, but I do think identity politics kind of played a role as to why she wasn't taken seriously in the house, and why people listen to other people who fit more with their identity politics compared to her, and there is definitely some slight misogynoir within how she was treated in the house. But she did have some major flaws. I think she relied too much on Alec and Peter at times, and she should have broadened her horizons when she saw that they weren't crap. Overall, she's definitely one of the more underrated and better players of the season, despite all of her shortcomings, and she's very entertaining. Now, we moved on to week 8, and here's where the season starts to get very predictable and boring. But there are still a few decent moments that kept it from being a complete snooze fest, so it was okay, and things usually get boring around the endgame anyways. So, Jillian wins HH again, and Emmett senses that Tala is pissed off at him for nominating her in the double. He claims that he did it because she was close with Topaz, and Tala doesn't buy it. Even Andrew questions Jillian as to why Emmett nominated Tala initially, since it could have left him vulnerable if Topaz won the veto. He and Jillian clown Peter for not making the smart move in vetoing Topaz. Everyone shades Jillian winning another HRH room, and it's really funny. Peter pitches to Emmett about targeting Andrew. Emmett mentions that he kept Peter around to target Andrew just in case, so that's very smart of Emmett. Tala and Andrew lose the have-not competition, and Tala has a meltdown, annoying the other house guests. Jillian is thinking about nominating her because she hasn't pulled her weight at all in the Alliance, while everyone in the East Coast Alliance has won 3 competitions so far. Andrew and Tala bicker over her not doing the have-not cleaning task, and then they bicker about who should be a pawn, with him mentioning that she's a floater and a non-threat. Their arguing this week is very funny and is one of the few entertaining things about the week. Peter manages to convince Emmett that Andrew and Tala should go on the block, since if not, Andrew can veto Tala and send home Emmett, like what Peter should have done with Topaz, essentially. Emmett is convinced, or at least that's what the edit made it seem like, and talks about it with Jillian. This causes her to nominate Peter and Andrew instead of Peter and Tala. So Peter thinks that he is a pawn and he has a final three with Jillian, who knows it's wrong to have both Peter and Andrew thinking that they're pawns, and Andrew is pissed off that he's nominated over Tala, and this is where his entitlement starts to show throughout the next few weeks. Jillian convinces Tala to not use the veto if she somehow wins it to put Emmett on the block. Emmett gets disqualified from the competition due to helping Jillian and has a huge meltdown, which is really funny. He just wouldn't take accountability for the fact that he helped Jillian, or he attempted to help Jillian. But it was funny, and it showed another side to Emmett that didn't make him a complete bore like many people in his archetype. Emmett is still being a baby about being disqualified after the competition's over, causing him to argue with Andrew about it, as Andrew calls him out for claiming to not hear the rule. Emmett thinks it shows Andrew not having his back, but Andrew's just being blatantly honest. Peter and Emmett both separately mention in the diary room that if Jillian wasn't playing with her emotions and just playing with strategy, she would boot Emmett now. Even Andrew said this in the diary room, so it kind of shows how they don't really respect her the most as a game player, or as much as she thinks she does, and how everyone kind of assumes her game is heavily reliant on Emmett. Andrew makes a final two deal with Jillian, though she admits that this is a lie. Peter claims that Andrew got lucky, Tala is a floater, and Jillian is a liar, so he only respects Emmett and his game. Andrew and Tala argue once again as she's on the block and is complaining about it. Emmett decides to do jury management and tells Peter that Jillian is wavering on the decision and their final three. Apparently, Jillian swore on her life that Peter will get to the final four, which is a really stupid move pertaining jury management, and he has the right to be better, as well as Topaz and Alec for what happened in the prior week. Peter convinced Emmett that he should boot Tala, and Emmett tries and fails to convince Jillian that Tala needs to go. Peter tries to bait Tala into admitting that she would cut Jillian off, so he tells Jillian this to waiver her and tells Emmett the same thing, and the showmance discusses who to cut. I don't have additional feed context, but from what is shown on the episodes, it seems like Emmett wants Tala gone. Jillian finally puts her foot down and says that Peter needs to go, so it seems like taking Peter out is her move solely, and Peter goes out on a unanimous vote. Peter is very frustrating throughout the season, since you can clearly tell that he's putting on an act, especially in his diary rooms, and is just very annoying in it. While he does have some decent reads in the game, he isn't as smart or as strategic or as great as his reads as he thinks he is, and you could tell that as the season went on, he just couldn't accept that there are others who are playing better games than him, or different games than him, that was causing them to have more success than he was. Like I mentioned, he and Alec decided to play like Chilltown, and to a lesser extent, Dan too much, without realizing that their positions in this current game and Chilltown and Dan's games in their other seasons weren't the same. And he looked down on many people that he should have kept around that would have had his back. And he was really Emmett and Jillian's lapdog, essentially, especially Emmett, where at least Alec had moments where he realized that he needed to take a shot at them, but Peter just wasn't about it. Overall, kind of annoying, but he did annoy me as much as last or prior rewatchers, and his downfall was pretty fun, at least. Now we're in the penultimate week of week 9, and honestly, things just get very boring around here. And there's a returnee where there's a vote set up where we get to choose one of the first 4 returnees as to which one can come back. And they clearly made it a vote instead of another measure or another way because they wanted Gary to come back. So unsurprisingly, Gary returns to the house and Emmett wins HOH. It's very ridiculous that they decided to have a returnee come in At the final four, Andrew's rightfully pissed off, Jillian and Tala aren't happy, and Emmett is actually happy that Gary is back. Gary speaks to Jillian and mentions how hurt he was that they, meaning Julian and Emmett, specifically voted him out due to how close they were. They tell him that they knew about his final four with Topaz, Peter, and Alec, and Gary claims that it was a false final four, where it kind of was false for him. Jillian walks away, and Gary tells Emmett that he wants to send her home. Emmett snaps at him since she's still in hearing distance in the HOH room, but they officially make a final two. Gary lies about Andrew being a huge jury threat to make Andrew a bigger target. And I really, really hate this because he was able to use jury information to influence the house guests with whatever information. So, what Gary pretty much said, to us at least, is that Andrew isn't a huge threat and they felt like he coasted along. That's what Peter said, but clearly Alec, Topaz, and I would assume it's just Alec and Topaz felt this way as well. Jillian and Gary talk, and he knows that she's hated by the jury, which Jillian also suspects, since Peter threatened to poison the jury against her before he left, and she snapped at him. Andrew automatically thinks that Gary and Tala are nominated, and he's annoyed that she wants a free ride. He speaks to Emmett and lashes out at him, and then he does the same thing to Jillian, which causes her to flip, but Emmett is unfazed. So, Andrew and Gary are nominated, and Andrew's entitlement really grows here, because he feels like he shouldn't be nominated as a pawn because he won more competitions, and that Floater should be nominated, but that's not how the game goes. So, Jillian starts to bait Tala to see where her loyalty truly lies, and whether she will choose Andrew, which Tala wouldn't, or align with Gary. Andrew and Tala argue in the washroom about being nominated, and they're both irritating the heck out of me at this point, and it's beyond old. Dan comes in the house and gives his advice to all the players, and it's clear to me, and to many other people, that Dan pretty much advises all of them to boot Emmett, and I don't like this interference, and I do think that it interfered with the final result, especially since he is an outside player giving advice to the players inside the game. So someone who wasn't isolated giving advice to isolated house guests. Gary and Tala talk after he wins the veto and makes a deal. Emmett sees this on his HOH webcam and tells Jillian that Tala wants to target him, Emmett, but Jillian doesn't see it and she doesn't get it. At this point, Emmett doesn't want to send Andrew home, and Gary is pissed off that Emmett is not keeping his word. So, Emmett starts to distance himself from Jillian as a ruse, and he starts to kind of like somewhat bash her or make it seem like he's going to cut her. Tala is nominated as the replacement nominee, and Andrew pitches to Emmett and Jillian about loyalty and campaigns to Gary without making a deal, which is stupid on his part. Tala and Andrew end up fighting due to a punch of tension over the last few weeks, and Jillian wants to send Tala home because she's a floater and Andrew didn't deserve what happened in that fight. She felt like Emmett aided and abetted Tala, as Andrew and Emmett are apparently the only two people that Jillian likes. And she tends to do this a lot, where she says that she hates a lot of people that she's supposedly close to, so there's a lack of transparency there. Juliet and Emmett end up sleeping in separate rooms to create the illusion that they're distant, and this was Emmett's idea. So there's more of them individually making deals and Jillian wanting Andrew to stay, but it's clear that Emmett and Gary made up their minds to evict Andrew. So speaking about Andrew, I didn't think much of him during the earlier weeks, though it's clear that he just played a low-key game, which is smart. He was an older house guest who was able to blend in with the younger cast, and he did have his entertaining moments, especially in the middle of the game. And I liked his interactions with AJ. I don't know when he officiated his alliance with Emmett and Jillian. It could have been something that was done earlier, but wasn't shown until later because it wasn't relevant to the immediate action of the house, or it really did form around week 6 or 7. Andrew's issue is that he saw the game in one way and thought that because he saw the game in his way that everyone should play like him and that he was more deserving of not being on the block. And that's not how the game's played, since it depends on the cast that's around you and who's able to outmaneuver who. And Andrew never considered targeting Emmett and Jillian, despite the fact that it was clear that they were always going to take one another over him, and there are other people that he could have beat, but he just never saw that. And he wasn't a big jury threat because they didn't respect him and they thought that he was a coaster. Either way, Andrew's still one of the better characters, and while he is likable, he's not one of my favorite or one of the standouts of the season. And now it's time to get into the final week of the season, and it's the standard final week where nothing really happens. That's very interesting. So it seems like during a chat with the girls, Tala wants Emmett out. Jillian doesn't feel like the other two, meaning Gary and Tala, deserve second place, so she is fine in taking Emmett and losing to him. Just another example of Jillian not being very focused on her individual game when it matters the most. Tala does get mad that Emmett cut her off during the BBCAN ceremony that happens every season, and she's noticeably quiet. They all push for her to speak up, though Emmett is clearly very annoyed, since he claims that she takes over conversations all the time, but she can't handle it during the one instance where she's cut off. He does put on a good face to not burn bridges, and at least he has that awareness. So Jillian ends up winning the Final Four HOH as usual, and she talks to Tala, who is worried about Gary and Emmett's relationship. Obviously, Jillian nominates Gary and Tala. Tala and Gary both have final two deals with Emmett. Jillian wants Gary gone, and Emmett wants Tala gone. Emmett wins the veto, and Emmett accidentally reveals to Jillian that he has a final two with Tala, which shocks her, since it shows how much of a game he's playing individually and without her. Definitely a slip-up on Emmett's part. Emmett tells Tala ahead of time that she is going home, and she doesn't take it well initially. Jillian is mad because Emmett didn't allow her to tell Andrew ahead of time that he's going home, but he did this with Tala, so it shows another way that he's prioritizing himself over Tala. He does give her Dan's bracelet because he knows that Dan is one of Tala's favorite players and knows a way to butter her up for jury vote, and it was very nice. Overall, it was a very emotional scene watching her getting ready for eviction. Tala was definitely an enjoyable presence throughout most of the season, though she did irritate me at times with her entitlement and not carrying her weight. But overall, she was a very light presence in the show, and she was very dynamic as well. Gameplay-wise, there's nothing there, so she's definitely a weaker player, and she definitely coasted a bit in the earlier weeks, though she did kind of just lump herself in with Emmett and Jillian at the end. Definitely one of the standouts of the season, at least entertainment-wise. So it's the final three, and it's the standard final three, where there's not much to talk about. Emmett and Jillian come into the final HOH Part 1 with a plan for her to win Part 1 and him to win Part 2, but it doesn't end up working the way they plan, with Emmett winning Part 1 since Jillian dropped out early, and Gary winning Part 2 of the HOH. Gary ends up winning the final HOH and evicting Emmett. While I knew Emmett was good, I forgot how great he was at this game upon rewatch. He just picked up on everything so quickly, so seamlessly, and he was a recruit who knew nothing about Big Brother beforehand, but he just picked up on everything that the game's about very well, with social skills, strategic acumen, self-interest, competitiveness, keeping calm, and all the above. Like I mentioned earlier, I think Tom going early helped his likability and gave him the opportunity to not just work with the bros and to work with people who were very different than him. He also has his anger issues, especially when he's disqualified for cheating, so that does give him an extra sense of dynamism, and the way he talked about his family and being a milkman, they gave him some more depth compared to many of the others of his archetype. I really enjoyed him, though he's definitely not a favorite. He's one of the favorites, and there's a reason why he became one of the all-stars of the season compared to people like The Shield, where he was just himself and he was playing the game being himself. He didn't emulate trying to be like someone else. He just was himself while playing a game, and he definitely is one of the selling points of the season. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, I do think Dan coming in and telling everyone to evict Emmett partially played a part into him being booted here, which I didn't like. So we're going to get to the final two questioning from the jury. So AJ asks Jillian a fluff question about what object she'll miss from the house. Alec asks Gary how the struggles he faced in life prepared him for the game. So clearly a question to help Gary. Gary gives an emotional answer about wanting to be an inspiration and life moving on after middle and high school, where people get picked on for being different. It was a nice answer, though it's still very emotional and not really strategic. Topaz asks Gary how he made it to the final two, despite being a target. This is clearly showing a bias for some of the jury members having for Gary. So, Gary mentions winning competitions and aligning himself with Jemet. Peter asks Villian how she isn't an idiot and a poor player like he thinks she is, and that she can't use competitions or Emmett as an answer. So clearly, the jury's better against Jillian. She mentions that she played a low-key social game where she is normally outgoing in real life, and she wanted to make big moves. Jillian then started mentioning competitions when Peter specifically told her not to do so in her answer. So, Andrew asks Jillian if their deal was real. Jillian answers that she was trying to give him non-verbal cues that he was leaving since Emmett wouldn't allow her to tell him, and she knew where the other two votes were going, but she didn't want him to leave. I feel like she gave a good answer here. Tala asks Gary which alter personality helped him the most in the house, and Gary responds that just being himself helped him connect with other people. Emmett asks Gary why he deserves to win over Jillian, where she had one life and he had two lives. Gary responds that he did anything he could to stay, mentioning the how bad do you want it competition, and was a target from day one. So a meh answer. Jillian gives a final speech about how all of the choices she made were for game and not Emmett controlling her, though you could tell some people just didn't believe her, and she was very nervous giving her final speech, where Arissa had to cut her off a few times. Gary gives a passionate speech about how anyone who is different can be a winner, he made big moves, did everything he could with the entire time he had, and deserved to win. And he mentions the Tom boot in pre-jury quite a bit, which you shouldn't be mentioning pre-jury to the jury since that's kind of irrelevant to them. Of course, we have the iconic moment of Topaz trying to make a dig at Jillian in her speech, causing her to think too much about Jillian, to the point where she accidentally picks up Jillian's name to put as her vote, and then Arissa revealing it caused Topaz to lose her mind since she intended to vote for Gary. She walks up to Arissa, telling her that it was a mistake. Arissa handles this very well, despite this being kind of live, and they're on a time crunch. But Topaz refused to leave, and then the entire thing's just so iconic and hilarious. But it did cost Jillian to win, and I do feel like this was karma working its positiveness and kind of rewriting a wrong, or making the universe go round, however that saying goes. So I already mentioned Gary beforehand, so I'm not going to talk much about him here. He came back not because of a skill he had, but because Canada essentially wanted him to come back, and they made it a vote, knowing that he had a very good edit. So there's some interference there. When he came back in the final five, it was good that he connected with Emmett and Jillian, though that was mainly Emmett making the first move. And something tells me that Dan was the reason why Gary ended up evicting Emmett, and I don't know if he would have done that on his own. Overall, he worked with what he had, but I don't think he is a great player, or that good of a player, but I don't think he was a bad player like I thought he was initially, or before this rewatch. Honestly, my opinion on Jillian kind of weakened with this rewatch, especially pertaining her gameplay. A lot of the choices she made were definitely influenced by Emmett, and while she had moments where she was thinking individually, it wasn't as often as I thought it was. There are many different things that she should have picked up on that she didn't and had to be reminded to by Emmett. She was very scatterbrained throughout the entire season and came off as very wishy-washy, and while I loved her excitement for breaking deals and making the right moves, she really had no concept of jury management. As a personality, Jillian is definitely likable, but she is not the most entertaining or the most boring, so she is kind of middle of the road in that element. Though she had her good moments and she had her bad moments. I definitely see why the jury was bitter against her, but what I don't like is that they planned to vote for Tala to win out of everyone in the final four and would have voted against Emmett, not because of him making the jury bitter or doing anything, but because they didn't want Jillian to feel some sense of win through Emmett's win. It was very stupid. But overall, I feel fine with her winning, even though it was technically by luck. But Gary shouldn't have been in the final two to begin with, so it kind of balanced it out for me. So overall, I feel like this season was a great start to the Canadian edition of Big Brother, but there are many moments where I thought the season was worse than I remembered, and there are other times where I thought the season was better than I remembered. So it all just balances out. Overall, I'd say that the season is a mid to good tier, not one of the best, but far from the worst. And it's kind of sad that the season's somewhat being left behind when people talk about Big Brother Canada, especially since I feel like it's the most raw and organic season of Big Brother Canada. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the future seasons will get overproduced and the episodes get too inauthentic. Overall, I definitely think that the season was more interesting in the middle weeks compared to the beginning and the end weeks. And while there are a lot of strategic intricacies, in general, it's kind of a steamroll. There's no way around it. And I don't like how some of the twists interfered with the game and it was just too off to me. So I'm going to make another video ranking the cast as players and go more into that element of them. And then afterwards, I will rewatch Big Brother Canada 2 and start the whole process again where I talk about the season and then in another video I'll talk about the players' gameplay and do it until I get to Big Brother Canada 10. Thank you all and I'll be back to continue this long journey. Bye!